Welcome everybody to Tales from the 90s. This week we are on episode 40. I can't believe we're already on episode 40, but this week we're going to take a trip back to April of 1993. This was the year that my brother turned 5 years old, and I was at the time, I was 9 years old in third grade, so let's go.
Wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street. Man, those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
Yeah, already 40 of these episodes already. And we're in April 1993. If you don't know the format, you're just watching this for the first time. I pick a random month and a random year in the 90s, and we go through it looking at different things, my memories, sports, music, pop culture, wrestling. Speaking of wrestling, as I'm recording this is the week after Hulk Hogan passed away, and I'll be getting into some of my memories of him when I get to my wrestling part of this, because that's another thing is I don't do anything in the same order. I just like randomly, some weeks I'll start talking about wrestling at first, sometimes it'll be last or in the middle, or you never know what you're going to get on here. Trust me, if you've been watching this long enough, you know that, or listening. We're on Spotify, YouTube, and Facebook. Let me know if it's easier to get this podcast anywhere else, because I'll think about putting them on there. Like I said, I got 40 of them now. But I also do bonus episodes, one a month, although there's an exception I'll talk about for August, but they're usually one a month and can be just whatever. Like, obviously, December's like Christmas themed, obviously, but like, and Halloween for October. But, and it doesn't have to be contained to the 90s too. That's why they're bonus episodes. But anyway, the one that came out this month was all about my experiences at restaurants, favorite restaurants, favorite fast food, favorite things to have there, all that kind of stuff. That was for this month. Next month, coming up for August, is what I'd planned was one episode, was my top 40 Tales from the Crypt episodes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the actual, unless it gets blocked, which the copyright crap, but I'm going to add the intros and the outros of Tales from the Crypt episodes, the Crypt Keeper parts, the parts that everybody loves the most, for those episodes. But then I got to thinking, it's like, this is going to be a 3 or possibly 4 hour video, and people just don't have that time, and plus that takes forever to edit together and stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate that into two. So August 15th is part 1, numbers 40 through 21, or 20, whatever, 21, yeah. And then part 2 will be August 22nd, and that will be 20 through number 1. And it's my ranking, it's no like official thing, it's just my favorites. And that's coming out, and then I've got the rest of the year's bonus stuff, but I'll talk about that when it's time. But that's coming in August. If you check out, I've been putting a lot of music covers. I've been using that Smule app. I love that thing where you can duet with people. It's karaoke. It's so much fun. But creative been on there too. But anyway, you can see all my videos on here. I got them in playlists to make it easier to find stuff. I've been shutting my wrestling channel down because I don't record for wrestling anymore. I'm still involved with it, but I just don't record for it anymore. So I just decided to take, one by one, the most popular videos and just move them over to my channel and, make them private, and eventually delete that whole other channel that used to be the Supreme Wrestling channel, but now I think it's, what is it, Southern Indiana Wrestling, or some generic title I put on it. It's just be a lot easier to focus all my energy on the one channel instead of trying to keep that one going. I have like 10 years worth of wrestling that eventually will be on here, but like I said, they'll all be in playlists and stuff. But you're here if watching this obviously because you want to hear about the 90s, not the now. So we're going to go back to the 90s, and what better way to do that is check out a Nickelodeon lineup from the 90s. This is from April 20th. I just picked a random day of the month, and it happens to be a Tuesday, so we're going to see what was on April 20th on Tuesday on Nickelodeon. Of course, April, everybody's still in school, so guaranteed there'll be Nick Jr. shows in the middle of the day. But of course, starting at the list I look on the fandom website starts at midnight. So of course, Nick at Night was on at midnight. We got the F Troop, and many of these shows I've never seen before. The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, the Patty Duke Show, the Donna Reed Show, Get Smart, the Dick Van Dyke Show. Never seen any of those. The Lucy Show, which is one of the Lucy and Desi Comedy Hour, I Love Lucy, and the Lucy Show, where I think I think she only had 3 that Lucille Ball had, and my mom loved her, so I remember watching those when she watched them. Obviously, I wasn't watching at 3 in the morning at Nick at Night. I was sleeping then. Now, 3 in the morning, it's like, that's too early to go to bed. Literally, like, if I go to bed at 3:30, it's an early night. But anyway, then we got the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Dragnet, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which I wasn't watching back then, obviously because I wasn't up then, but love that show now. Obviously, it's in the vein of a Twilight Zone, but Alfred Hitchcock is hosting it, obviously. Phenomenal, one of the earliest horror directors. Of course, Psycho is his probably most well-known work. Then we got The Adventures of Superman, which I believe is the old black and white series. I think it's George Reeves, Christopher Reeve's dad, played Superman in that one. Then we got Nick News, which us kids never really wanted to watch Nick News because, yeah, it was made for kids. It was on Nickelodeon, but it had the word news in the title. That's always going to make a kid, unless they're a strange kid that likes the news. Which there were some, but there were always the weird kids. You know how that goes. But at 6 in the morning, we got one of my favorites of all time, Mr. Wizard's World. If you never heard of that, it's sort of like a Bill Nye the Science Guy in Beakman's World, just not as, like, out there crazy type thing. It was more subdued. It was for kids, but I always enjoyed that one more. He took the time to go through all these different science experiments. It made them really fun without being like over the top crazy like Bill Nye was. Yeah, so everybody else was a Bill Nye guy. Yes, I had to rhyme it. But I was definitely watching Mr. Wizard's World. Then we've got Lassie, classic. Then we got Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon, which of course just old Looney Tunes stuff they put in on there with some Nickelodeon logos on there. But you can't go wrong with Looney Tunes. We got Nickelodeon's Most Wanted, Yogi Bear. I don't know why they gave it the Nickelodeon's Most Wanted title. Just trying to brand it. Then we got, what is this? Special Delivery, My Father the Clown. I don't know what that is. And Fair Game. I don't know what the Special Delivery was. Sometimes I do this on here. I'm going to look up and see what Nickelodeon Special Delivery was. I might remember it when I look it up. Let's see what Special Delivery was. Was it a show? It says 15 seasons. Let's see. It's an American anthology series on Nickelodeon, it says. That was the brief description. I'm going to the Wikipedia page. I know Wikipedia is not the end all of all facts and stuff, but it does have a lot of good information on it. But anyway, it says an American anthology series broadcast during weekend afternoons from 1980 till 1993. Let's see. Most of this program was made up of children-focused, made-for-TV movies, produced in Canada in the 70s and 80s, short films, made for ABC After School Special and CBS School Break. Okay, so it was kind of like, sort of like After School Special type things, but they had other stuff on here. Looked like they have concerts, skating championships. Well, that was in the 80s. What about these ones here in the 90s? Come on, get to the 90s. About this time. Yeah, they had Cinderella, The Jungle Book, although I guarantee those are not the Disney versions. Because you ever see, like, you get the videotapes where it says Cinderella, or you get Pinocchio or something, and it's not the Disney version. It's because those stories are, like, in the public domain. Disney just obviously made them bigger, but there's all kinds of, and they get known as the generic versions, even though technically it's all the same story, just not Disney. But we got One of them was The Adventures of Pete and Pete, which is obviously a Nickelodeon show. Tales from the Hoop, a basketball thing, obviously. New Misadventures of Itchetbog Krang. The Jungle Book by Saban. Saban's the one that did Power Rangers. Lassie's Great. So it was basically just like pretty much anything. They just put the special delivery title on it. That's pretty cool. So I probably didn't even think of them as that then. And like I said, April, I was in 3rd grade. And I was living in Norwood, so we didn't even have cable then. So I guarantee I wasn't watching it then. But anyway, like a 2-hour block of Eureka's Castle to start Nick Jr. Loved Eureka's Castle. I never really thought of it as a preschool show, even though technically it was. It was funny, you know. The Moat twins always arguing. The singing fish. Batley, Magellan, obviously. Then at 11, we've got Sharon, Lois, and Bram's Elephant Show, which I love that. Skinnamarink dinky dink, skinnamarink doo. I love you. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're like, this idiot's singing to me here on this stupid podcast. Shut up. But it was a great show. By the way, I'm trying to keep busy by doing my podcast. As I'm filming this, well, technically it's my daughter's dog, but still I consider it mine. I call her Dewey, but her name's Nautica. She's going in surgery. She had this mass that's been hanging off her for a while that needed to be taken care of, but Ari never got taken care of. Not trying to call her out, but anyway, Saturday night, it just bust open out of nowhere, and like it's done nothing but smell like, sorry to get graphic on here, but like rotten meat. That was Saturday night, couldn't call the vet till yesterday morning. I'm filming this on a Tuesday, by the way. But, called yesterday morning as soon as we could, and the earliest we could get an appointment was today, Tuesday. And they looked at it, and they were, originally, before they even looked at it, they're like, well, from what you're describing, it's probably going to have to get cut off there, but we're going to have to, fit it in on a surgery day. But they looked at it like, no, we're going to do that today. So, like $280, which I know is not the point of, I'm just saying it's like, that was literally our electric bill money that I had to overdraw to pay this. But it sucks, but it's something that has to be done. Not to get off on a sidetrack, I'm still in the Nickelodeon lineup here, but it really sucks that there's an emergency. You're going to get a bill, but if you don't have insurance, there's like a medical emergency, you can go to the ER anywhere and they'll take care of you. Yeah, like I said, I know there's going to be bills and any kind of aftercare you're going to have to pay for, but I wish there was something like that for dogs, because, and we looked into getting their insurance. The Lemonade stupid insurance wouldn't cover her because she's too old. Another one wanted $200 a month, and that's on top of a $500 deductible you got to pay. It wouldn't have even covered us at all. We'd be paying $200 a month for nothing and had to pay the whole thing. So dog insurance is nuts unless you're rich. Anyway, let's go back to the 90s. I'm sorry for that. We were talking about the Elephant Show. Sharon, Lois, and Bram's Elephant Show. Next is Capelli and Company. Never heard of that one. Fred Penner's Place was another one of those Canadian shows. It's kind of like the Elephant Show. I don't remember much, but I just remember he would like teach kids lessons and sing songs, just like the Elephant Show. Then we got Grimm's Fairy Tale Classics. This episode was Cinderella. Again, just like, everybody thinks Cinderella as Disney, one of the Disney princesses, but long before Disney owned it, it was a story. Classic story that, everybody knows it. Then at 1 o'clock, we got Muppet Babies. Love that cartoon. Follow that up with The World of David the Gnome. There's two back-to-back all-time classics there. Then we got the end of Nick Jr. at 2. Kids getting ready to come home from school. We got Dennis the Menace, the cartoon. Love that one. And then we got Flipper. Love that one. I get just like a lassie. And we got Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon again. Then we got the Underdog Show. That was my brother Josh's all-time favorite. I loved Underdog too, but he was like, anytime that song, do 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 do, the Underdog theme started, he would rush to the TV. He was in love with Underdog. All right, then we got Muppet Babies again. Hey Dude. The episode was Battle of $100. I just watched the 4 or 5 episodes last night of the first season of Hey Dude. I have it on DVD. They had it randomly at Dollar General, or not Dollar General, Dollar Tree, like a couple years ago, just season 1 for $1. You can't beat that. They didn't have the rest of them, sadly, but I believe you can watch them on Paramount Plus. But yeah, I was just watching 4 or 5 episodes last night. Just had it on the background while I was doing stuff on my computer. Just reminding me how much I love that show. 15, never heard of that one. Then we got What Would You Do? Mark Summers was the host, obviously the host of Double Dare. But this was sort of a game show, but more of like a variety show. They'd be asking kids questions outside Nickelodeon studios, kids in the audience participating in things. Of course, the Pie Pod, we had to go into it and get pies flung at you. And of course, they had the pie coaster. And they had the thing where you put the card on the back of your head. You gotta do what it says or get in the Pie Pod. Or later, they would have the wall where you had to reach in. You pick a certain spot and reach in, and you either get a prize or do what it says. I wish that show would be on somewhere on streaming, because love that show. Quit Snuggles. Like I said, more of a variety show than a game show. Sort of like the next one, even though I consider both game shows. My dog is whining. Snuggles, go eat your food, buddy. Wild and Crazy Kids. That was the sort of like, stop, Snuggles. Sort of like Field Day meets a game show. Where you have these like 3 teams, and there was really no points. You just all competing, doing like physical activities. Sometimes they'd be at a theme park. Sometimes they'd just be out in the field. Like I said, Field Day meets game show. Then we got Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon again. Bullwinkle's Moose-A-Rama, which was their version of Rocky and Bullwinkle. Obviously classic cartoon there from, I believe, the 60s, but kind of repackaged. And of course all the little shorts that went with it. Just like with Underdog, there was, I think was it Mr. Peabody? I can't remember if that was on Underdog or Rocky and Bullwinkle. Might have been on both, but they made a movie out of that later on. But that was one of the little short things. Just like with Garfield and Friends, the Friends part is Orson and all the buddies and pals on the farm. Well, this was this was that, only a little shorter. Then right at 8 o'clock, we go back to Nick at Night. We got Get Smart, Dick Van Dyke Show, Dragnet, Lucy Show, Mary Tyler Moore Show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and then end the day with The Adventures of Superman. So that is the Nickelodeon lineup. Sorry it took forever to get through. I had to talk about my dog in the middle. Hope she's doing good. Hope the surgery goes well, obviously. Before we get out of TV land here. 1 second. My wife just got the call that Due did good in surgery. She's in recovery and doing well, so good. I was worried about that. Literally, right after I just said I had to talk about my dog, she got the call, so I'm glad everything went well. Hope they didn't add any charges, because I don't know. Are they going to keep her until we can pay? Because I don't know. Anyway, we'll move along in our podcast now that worry's out of my head. We're going to take a quick look at the TGIF lineup for, obviously, the 1992-1993 TV season. Start off with Family Matters, the lead show. They were in season 4 at that time. Step by Step was, they were in their 2nd season. Of course, that was made by the same people. Not a spinoff, but made by the same people that made Stop! The next 2 shows I've never heard of. Getting By. Never heard of that one. It was the first season for that show. It would move to NBC for its second and final season. And then a show called Where I Live. It was the first season of 2. So like I said, I never heard of those. I wasn't really watching TGIF at the time. But obviously I was watching Family Matters and Step by Step and Syndication. That's where I know those shows. Same with Boy Meets World. I first seen that in Syndication. Of course, this is... I believe this is the year Boy Meets World started the next TV season, which would be September. This is April 93, like I said. But, sort of, it has to do with sports, but it's also more of a newsworthy item. I've talked about NASCAR on here during my sports report. But, the 1992, which is the year before, obviously, NASCAR champion was Alan Kulwicki. on, I can't remember, I didn't put the date down, but in this month, yeah, on the way to the, which reminds me, I forgot to add the NASCAR results for this. I just remembered that. That's why I didn't. I got little notes in here that says move to sports, and I didn't move it because I forgot to do the NASCAR. So if you're wondering what happened in April of 1993 of NASCAR, I'm sorry, I forgot. But back to what I was talking about. Sadly, he died in a plane crash on the way to the Bristol race, the Food City 500, I think it was. It's the day race at Bristol. So yeah, he actually died in a plane wreck, and he was the reigning NASCAR champion. I mean, who knows how big he could have been if his life hadn't been cut short. It's definitely tragic. I wasn't watching NASCAR at the time, so obviously I had no clue about that, but it's just, looking back, it's very sad. Another sort of news here is the thing you're watching me on right now. Even if you're on an app or whatever you're on, you're still on the WWW, the World Wide Web. The source code for the World Wide Web was released for use by everyone by I can't remember the company that had it, but it was invented by a British scientist in 1989 as a way to get on the internet. Nowadays it's just go to Google. Everybody even forgets the www half the time. But before that, there was an internet that existed, but it wasn't like you see today, where you just type in a web address and you go. And like I said, today people don't even think about it as typing in an address. Just, tap on an app and go to it, and but it's still all run on the what's known as the World Wide Web, and that was a big thing then. The World Wide Web, www. Dot whatever, dot slash whatever, all that stuff. But yeah, hard to think that like it was during this month and this year that became open source code for anybody to use, and they obviously everybody ran with it, and now everything you do this right now wouldn't exist without the internet. Streaming, apps, everything. You think of life if the internet was gone right now. If it hadn't been for that, being able to use that code so easily to create websites and to give access to the internet, like you always hear about the important inventions. That's going to go down as one of the biggest, if not the biggest, invention of all time, just because of the amount of things you can do with it. You can attend school online, you can do meetings, you can talk to family members that live across the country or across the world you haven't seen before, or meet family members that way, or meet people. Shopping, you can work online. So much of video work for any kind of company is basically based online. So I don't know why I need to tell you guys how important the internet is. Anybody watching this, you obviously know. But back at this time, like I said, I didn't have the internet then. Obviously, we had the computer we had, which I think my mom had then, or maybe she might not have had it yet. I don't think she started going to college, but I believe she hadn't started or was close to be started. I can't remember. Anyway, she had one of those computers, the black screen with like the green writing on it, the MS-DOS, the floppy disk and the hard disk drive, no CD drives in those. The memory on it's probably holds 3 pictures worth of today's pictures. Those old computers. But we were getting settled in Norwood. Like I said, I was 9 years old, and we had just moved to Norwood a few months ago. But it was the first time living there, at least that I remember. I may have lived there. I think I lived there at some point before we moved with Josh's dad to Kentucky. I think that's where we'd lived. But I was so young, I don't even remember that. But we were living with Marky Foe, the great. My mom and him had just got together earlier, the year before. So we moved to Norwood, and I was just, getting settled in there in 3rd grade, having to meet new kids, trying to make friends with them. You know, that's always difficult being the new kid. Experienced that a few times going to school, but just, you know, Marky Phil hadn't started really to be abusive or anything yet. He was still playing the nice, you know, oh, I'm gonna win the kids over before his true colors shone through. So things weren't going that bad. You know, I was, like I said, going to school, learning the neighborhood. Where we lived was the very last house in Norwood. Bond Hill was literally the house next to us, and literally the street. Literally, we lived on Section Avenue, but I'm trying to remember the name of that street, but it turned into a different, even street name at that next house. Oh, I can't think of that name right now. I'll probably think of it by the time I'm done. Rhode Island, that's what it is. It was Rhode Island, or is it Street, Avenue, Road? I don't know. Rhode Avenue Road sounds weird, but that's what it was for that the Bond Hill section. And then, like I said, Norwood started, and that's where Section Avenue started. Yeah, we were literally the last house. Of course, the very next year we would move into the next door because we were renting this house. We would, you know, buy the house next door, and that's a whole nother story which I told before, but I'll probably tell again. But at this time we were living in this rental house, and I remember this like closet they converted to make like a bathroom where it just had a toilet. And I remember the sign that they hung in there: "Be like Dad, not like Sis. Lift the seat before you piss." I remember that. But like I said, learning the neighborhood. We weren't really friends with any of the neighbors yet at this time. But you know, we knew, you know, we weren't at this time, we weren't allowed to go anywhere, and then later we weren't allowed to do anything at all. But there was a park down the street which we never got to go to, sadly. It was Hunter Park. Got to go to the store to get. I started a routine like every Saturday and Sunday. He would send me to get something for breakfast from UDF, which is my favorite place ever. United Dairy Farmers. It's a Cincinnati thing. It was owned by Carl Linder, which was a very wealthy businessman. He owned the Reds at one point. He don't own them anymore, but he had the Linder Mansion. We always took field trips to there because it was like this, like almost like park area there. It was like real fancy place. But anyway, UDF is a store where they have the world's greatest chocolate malts, I'm telling you. But they're famous for their pink cow and brown cow, which is just like a root beer float, or the pink cow is just like Barg's red cream soda with ice cream. But anyway, we'd go there, send me, usually it would be me. Didn't have a bike this time, I was walking, but I remember the times I did have a bike, it was fun to ride up there. But usually give me I get to pick the breakfast we get, which my favorite thing they don't have anymore is those cherry sweet rolls. If you remember those, everybody knows the iced cinnamon rolls. You know, it's the like rectangle, and you get 6 of them if you cut it. But these were cherry sweet rolls, which were the same type of icing, but inside was like, you know, cherry instead of like the cinnamon in the rolls. Those things were so good, but they discontinued them. The closest that I can find is Walmart has a strawberry variety, but it's, you know, still not that close. But it was that, and if they were out of those, it'd be like powdered donuts or zebra cakes. Christmas tree cakes around Christmas time, obviously. You know, fudge rounds, Little Debbie snacks, all that type of stuff. You know, Saturday and Sunday. Of course, Sunday's the big newspaper, but I had to go there and get the newspaper for them because, you know, think of that now. You go walk up to the store to get the newspaper to read the news, when now you just get on your phone. You know, there is something lost in today, I think. As good as the internet is, there's sort of like, you know, I don't know, like innocence is the word for it, but just like, you know, just something lost about not being able to do that type. I mean, you still can read the newspaper and everything, but it just doesn't seem like the same type of world. And I guarantee you our parents felt the same when they were our age now, and our kids will feel the same. It's been the same throughout generations, but the more things change, you know, sounds stupid, but the more things change, the more things change. I always hear the more things change, the more things stay the same. Well, that's true for some things, but, you know, sometimes when things change, you know, that's why I do podcasts like this, and go back to the nostalgic time, if I can speak. Just to, you know, not because I'm saying, oh, that time's better than this. You know, it's hard to compare times because, you know, like I said, the internet was just getting started then. You know, I couldn't see life without the internet now. So, but I lived life without it. So, yeah, it's one of those things. You know, every generation, if you look honestly and not just with nostalgic eyes, you're gonna find great things about the past, bad things about the past. Great things about today, bad things about today. You know, it's life. You guys know that. But one thing I was introduced to thanks to my brothers. Oh wait, no, it wasn't this time. I'll save that. I'll save the Hot 100 for another time. I was going to segue into music because the Billboard Hot 100 charts. Well, the Hot 100 was a special videotape that Marky Foe had. Let's just say adults only were supposed to watch this tape. Me and my brothers discovered it, so. But yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, Travis was only like a year and 2 months at this time, so it wasn't during this time. I'll save that for another time. I told it before anyway. Sometimes I'll repeat things on here because I'll run out of memories, and you know, people might not watch every episode, but I'll save that for another one. Anyway, we'll move into music. My favorite music is country, obviously, if you've seen in my videos on this channel. But I try to give the Billboard Hot 100 #1 songs of the month just for historical purposes. This song and this band, I'm guessing, I've literally never heard of. The song was called Informer by Snow. I've never heard of them. Like, even now, like, was this some kind of one-hit wonder? I don't know, but it was #1 for all of April and most of March. 7 weeks total #1, and I've never heard of this song or this band. I'm guessing Snow is a band. It doesn't sound like a person's name. But, like, you know, I've heard a lot of pop and rock stuff. You know, Bon Jovi's one of my favorite bands ever now, and if you'd have told me that I would have said that back in the 90s, I'd be like, what? I don't like them people. They're on rock. I don't like them. You know, but I expanded my music since then, but still always my favorite period of music will always be 90s country. You could check out one of my bonus episodes on here was all about my favorite 90s artists and songs. Not ranked, just giving a listing of some of the favorites. Anyway, if you want to check that out, it's on here. But American Country Countdown is what I was always listening to. #1 for a week in April, and then the last week of March, so a total of 2 weeks, was Clint Black's When My Ship Comes In. That's a great song. Just saying, you know, it won't be long until things are going good. Basically, one of those type songs. The Heart Won't Lie by Reba McEntire and Vince Gill. It was #1 for 2 weeks. That's one of them classic duets. I just did that on the Smule app that I was talking about with somebody. They did the Reba McEntire part, and I added the Vince Gill part the best I could. She said I had good harmonies, so you know, I guess I did okay on that one. But Vince Gill's a hard one to sing, but that's a classic song. I remember the video to that well. They were like in the military, and they were in like a relationship, but Vince Gill was like the instructor, or not drill instructor, but he might have been. But he was like over her in rank, and they weren't supposed to be together, but they were. Classic video. And then She Don't Know She's Beautiful by Sammy Kershaw, which I'm surprised was only #1 for 1 week. Might be his signature song, not my favorite. My favorite song by him is Yard Sale. But that's a song that like everybody from the 90s knows. Great song. Sorry for the frog in my throat. But get into the albums that were released. There was a lot of really good albums that were released this month. I don't always talk about every album that's released. Obviously, they're all country, but I do for the ones that I either owned or was important. And there was a lot this month. Tired of this frog in my throat. But the first one to talk about is Toby Keith's self-titled debut album. It went platinum, so it sold 1 million copies, and this was like right out of the gate establish him as a star. His very first song is still, I think, his signature song. Should Have Been a Cowboy. Number one for many weeks, and even though it was released 3 years into the decade, it was found to be by statistics to be the number one most played song of the 90s. So, and of course everybody knows that song now. Obviously rest in peace to Toby Keith. He died last year. But that wasn't the only good song on here. He Ain't Worth Missing only went to number 5, but that was the early Toby Keith, his love songs. He obviously got away from that later on and went to the more rowdy stuff. But for me, you can't beat the 90s Toby Keith love songs. So many great ones, including that one there. A little less talk and a lot more action with a great song. It went to number 2. And Wish I Didn't Know Now went to number 2. So, big first album for Toby Keith. Really set the tone. He was one of the ones that could have went away, once the 2000s hit. But he sort of reinvented himself. Like I said, I wish he would have done more of the ballads, because when he did do ballads later on, they were still really good. But he was going with what was selling. The faster songs, the rowdier songs. But he's one of them ones that could have went away, but he reinvented himself and stuck around for another 20 years in music. Patty Loveless put out Only What I Feel. This was her 6th album. And it's sort of a comeback album for her. She'd put out a greatest hits like the year before, but it took some time off because she had vocal cord surgery. I wish I sounded that good after having vocal cord surgery. I can't get the frog out of my throat now. But it was a great album. Probably her signature song, or one of them, came off this one, Blame It On Your Heart. And that is the shortened version. That's the title of the song. It went to number 1. But it is the actual full title of that line is, let me see if I can remember it now. Blame it on your lying, cheating, cold, dead beating, let's start that again. Blame it on your lying, cheating, cold, dead beating, two-timing, double dealing, mean, mistreating, loving heart. Had to get that right. It's almost hard to do that without singing it, but great song. How Can I Help You Say Goodbye? That one's a tearjerker, especially if anybody's ever had their mom die, which I haven't, and I'm obviously dreading that day, but also dreading hearing that song afterwards. See, I'm the type of person that will do that. Like, if something, whenever I had breakups in the past, I would sit there and listen to sad songs. It's almost like, it's almost like, let's go down that road, let's get all this grief out now. Like when my dad died, I'd listen to songs like That's My Job, Conway Twitty. But, that's the way I deal with things. So, not looking forward to, hopefully it's many, 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 many years from now, but that song is going to be hard to hear. How Can I Help You to Say Goodbye? It's a great song, but it's going to be hard to hear. It went to number 3. A song called You Will, which I don't remember hearing at all, went to number 6. It was originally an Anne Murray song. I wasn't really an Anne Murray fan. Sorry. Just never really got into her. And a song called Nothing But the Wheel, which is a really good one. Very underrated. It only went to number 20, but for some people it's their favorite Patty Loveless song. Joe Diffie put out Honky Tonk Attitude. That was his 3rd album. It made it to number 10 on the country album charts. Songs that came from that, obviously the title track, Honky Tonk Attitude. It went to number 5. Prop Me Up Beside the Jukebox, number 3. Funny story with that song. My dad and my sisters all worked at this, I think it was U.S. Shoe, 9 West Shoe. I think they were both called both names. Maybe they had a different name too. But anyway, it was a shoe company. They made, I don't know if they made shoes or I think they did. But I know they boxed them up there. Because that song when that song came out, there's a radio station there in town called Froggy, which I believe they're one of them ones now where they still play local music, and they have DJs in the morning and stuff, but it's one of them ones that has programming from wherever a central location for whatever company, because that's how radio stations and news stations are now. They're all owned by other companies. They're not independent. Well, some are, but Froggy was, was the local radio station, and they would always call in, especially because that was the big job in town until that closed down, 1999. I think I was there when it closed down. But when the Prop Me Up Beside the Jukebox came out, my dad, being my dad, had to rename it Prop Me Up Beside the Shoebox. And they would always request it, like, this goes out to the people at the shoe factory. But yeah, my dad told me that story. Which, if you know my dad, half his stories he makes up. Like the one he told me he was the actor Ed Harris, and he just changed his name for Hollywood, and all this other stuff. But I think that one he genuinely was telling the truth on. My dad had some freaking stories, I'm telling you. I could do a whole podcast on him. I basically did when I did the Mother's and Father's Day bonus episode. I told that story on there. If you feel like listening to that, go ahead. But back to Joe Diffie. Anyway, that song went to number 3. I'm surprised it wasn't a number 1. John Deere Green, another one of his signature songs, number 5. And In My Own Backyard went to number 19, which I don't even remember that being on the radio, being a single. They didn't play it a lot in Cincinnati. We listened to B105 there. Y96 later on. But, well, both actually, but that really wasn't a station then. I think it was like a rock, and then they changed it to Young Country, Y96. But anyway, yeah, I don't remember hearing In My Own Backyard. Later on, when I was, downloading music, I listened to it and I was like, that's a good song. I had no idea it was a single. It only went to number 19, like I said. They didn't play it a lot in our area, if at all. But it also, another song on this album was If I Had Any Pride Left at All, which was later released as a John Barry single. Love John Barry. He's got a great voice. But some other good album tracks include I'm Not Through Loving You Yet, Somewhere Under the Rainbow, and That Was the Easy Part. So that whole album would probably go on my Tales from the Albums episode, where I pick out a country album that had a big impact on me. That's probably one in the future, and one I'll be talking about soon will be on there too. Tracy Bird's self-titled debut album, which I'll be going to see him Thursday at the Rock the Rhine Watermelon Festival. Yes, the Watermelon Festival. You know he's going to be doing Watermelon Crawl. But yeah, I'll be seeing him Thursday in Jackson County. Also, Dina Carter. Love her. Can't wait to see them both. Can't believe they're both on the same day. But his first album, Tracy Bird, that is, his 2 hits that came off that are Holden Heaven and Someone to Give My Love To, which was originally a Johnny Paycheck song. Of course, Don't Take Her, he would release later on, was I think a number 1 hit. Was also a Johnny Paycheck song, but great start. Of course, the Watermelon Crawl and all that, his Keeper of the Stars would come later albums, but the first album was still a good one. And another one that I love almost all the songs on, all except maybe 3, was definitely going to be on Tales from the Albums one day, is Doug Supernall's debut album, Red and Rio Grande. Of course, Doug Supernall, along with Joe Diffie, died just a few years ago. But this album was a very good album. The first single off of it, which I never even realized was a single, only went to number 50. It was called Honky Tonkin' Fool. It's a sort of a funny song about this guy, he never got over his woman, was always playing Your Cheating Heart by Hank Williams Sr. on the jukebox. So he's saying when he dies, he don't want a tombstone, just wheel the jukebox out with an extension cord and keep playing Your Cheating Heart, and that's what they did in the song. That's a fun song. His song, the first one I heard from him was Reno, went to number 4. It's a great song, but his signature song, the one he's definitely by far most known as, and I think his only number 1, was I Don't Call Him Daddy. Classic song, of course. It definitely hit me hard because, being with this new guy, Marky Foe, and I think at this time he was trying to get us to call him Dad. So we would eventually out of fear, but and at this time my dad was actually coming over to babysit us before he got into it with Marky Foe, and they were just looking for a reason, and it would be 4 or 5 years till I get to see my dad again, thanks to that freaking idiot Marky Foe. Sorry to turn this dark all of a sudden, but anyway, that song has a lot of meaning for dads, obviously, you know, dads that separate from their wives or girlfriends or whoever, you know, and get their kids on the weekends or whenever they get them, you know, to deal with the pain of not getting their kid all the time, or you know, and especially when their ex gets with another person, you know, it's basically the kid saying, I don't call him daddy. But you as a kid, I felt that in a different way. It was, of course, obviously it's meant to you know, for those dads that have visitation. Of course, it works for moms too, that if it's the other way around. But it hit me as a kid as like, you know, because like I said, he was trying to get us to call him daddy. Well, not daddy, dad. But, you know, it was like, that song hit me like, you know, I don't want to call another person dad. I got one dad, you know. I wouldn't call another person mom. It's, you know, it's weird how that song hit me as a kid, because obviously I didn't have kids of my own when I was 9 years old. Trust me, I was nowhere near having kids at 9 years old. But I was surprised to find out later that this was originally recorded by Kenny Rogers, and I have the version. It's okay. It's just weird to hear him singing it. Like, if I'd never heard the Doug Supernall version, it wouldn't be as weird. But definitely, you know, it was okay, like I said, but it was just weird with Kenny Rogers singing it. Like, Kenny Rogers always looked old even when he wasn't old. It's like, it should be called, I don't call him Granddaddy. Should have done the sequel. But some great album songs on there. The Perfect Picture, To Fit My Frame of Mind. I can't remember. I think it was either Charlie Pride's brother or his son recorded that song later on for a minor hit. But that's a great song. I Would Have Loved You All Night Long, and You're Gonna Bring Back Cheating songs. That, you know, his first two albums were like spectacular. Like, I don't know why he wasn't a bigger star. Sorry, I'm taking forever. It's like 47 minutes into this. I'm just talking up the storm today, apparently. We're going to quickly move into Happy Meal toys, or kids' meal toys. Everybody knows it as Happy Meals, you know. We're going to get a Happy Meal, even if you're going to Wendy's. But McDonald's Happy Meal toys, they had the Looney Tunes Quack Up car chase vehicles. And these were just Looney Tune characters in, like, signature cars. Like, they had Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, and Taz, and they were all in vehicles. Wendy's Kids had the Wendy's Kids Meal Arts, and these were like little art supply things. Like, there was like these little things you put on, crayons you put on your fingers. They were like wide, and they go on your fingers, and you go like this on the paper. They had crayons, and they had chalk and a little paint set. But Taco Bell wasn't putting out any toys at this time for their kids meal, but they were recalling some toys. Now, this is today's generation of kids. Well, I guess they're young adults now, is known as the Tide Pod generation. But apparently we weren't all that smart back then either, because they had to recall some toys. First of all, they had the Busy World of Richard Scarry, which is one of my favorite Nickelodeon cartoons. They had finger puppets, and kids were getting their tongues stuck in the finger puppets. And they had these blow-up balls. I said dolls. They had yeah. They're like, maybe we shouldn't give kids blow-up dolls. No, blow-up balls. You know, those like I don't know, sort of like, I guess, sort of like a balloon, but they were like balls. Anyway, they had from Busy World of Richard Scarry, but also from Rocky and Bullwinkle ones. But kids are apparently getting dizzy from blowing them up. It's like, come on, our generation was, you know, we had to have warnings, because that's really where the warnings started. You know, I'll talk crap about the current generation, but the warnings came from our generation, I guess. But I mean, like, anybody ever blow up a balloon, you get dizzy from that. Like, were these things like so like overpowering that kids were literally passing out, or just getting dizzy? But anyway, if you return the stuff that got recalled, they give you a free taco. But yeah, as much crap as I like to talk about the current generation, I get all this warning stuff really started with our generation. You know, you look back with the rose-colored glasses, you know, our generation was this, but really, that's where it started. I got no excuses for it. But speaking of fast food, there was some fast food innovations coming out around this time. Of course, nowadays we're used to new stuff coming out all the time, new flavors of drinks. There's a new 5 or 6 Mountain Dews a year, which I love, by the way. I'm not complaining. I love all the flavor pops and all the different stuff that comes out. Give me more. But during this time, Taco Bell had a steak and chicken fajita wrap, which they were trying to be, more like, had the fajita meat, either steak or chicken with peppers, like inside of like a tortilla, trying to get, more of an authentic Mexican experience, kind of the stuff you'd have at Chi-Chi's, if you remember that restaurant, or Chili's, or places like that. It didn't last long. They also came out with a 7-layer burrito, which was vegetarian, which for the time was pretty, not innovative, but there was hardly any meatless options then, so this was pretty big for the time. It was discontinued in 2020 because they were making the menus smaller at the time because, it was 2020. Everything had to get DoorDash, so they're trying to make the options smaller. Pizza Hut, this was the time they came out with the Bigfoot pizza, if anybody remembers that. It was 2 foot long and had 21 slices with 3 toppings, only for $10.99. And not only that, but when it came out, you could, I don't know how long the promotion went on, but you could either get a free month of HBO, which wasn't streaming, wasn't HBO Max then, it was the cable channel. So if you had cable, you get a free month of HBO, or you could get a free Blockbuster rental with every purchase of Bigfoot pizza. So that was, and for $10.99 for 21 slices of pizza, like 2 foot long, but it was discontinued a couple years later because the packaging needed for it, obviously the giant boxes and the amount of dough it took, it just wasn't feasible, especially that price they were charging. Yeah, I know $10.99 then was expensive for pizza, but I mean, I think someone recently did the math on all those pizzas they ordered on Home Alone, and it turns out it was like $11 a pizza. So that was expensive even then. But I think on that one they obviously ordered a fancy pizza restaurant because obviously the McAllisters could handle that charge. They lived in a freaking mansion basically. But Burger King came out with the chicken crisp sandwich, which you probably know that now as the Crispy Chicken Junior. It was renamed that in 2013, but it was basically a way to try to combat McDonald's McChicken. Long before the chicken sandwich wars of the 2020s, everybody trying to be the Chick-fil-A and the Popeyes chicken sandwich, and then the McDonald's and the Burger King and the Wendy's. Long before that chicken sandwich war, there was the smaller chicken sandwich war. I guess they call them ones now the premium chicken sandwich. These are just the regular ones. But anyway, KFC came out with spicy chicken bites. Now they were described as chicken pieces, so I don't know what part of the meat. It might have been a mixture of the different pieces of chicken. But anyway, it was cut up pieces of chicken. It was obviously boneless, skinless, and then this like little spicy thing with seasoning. Originally, you could get them for $1.99 a serving. It didn't last very long. And then McDonald's around this time, to try to be more environmentally friendly, in other words, environmentalists were coming after them, they switched from the styrofoam cases that are things for all their sandwiches that we all remember to the paper wrappers. Of course, Big Mac went in a cardboard box. I don't remember if it did originally, or if it was always in a cardboard box, or if it was in styrofoam, but I can't remember exactly. But of course you get it in the cardboard box today, but the sandwiches are still in the paper wrappings. That's fine. It's definitely cheaper, I think, and definitely takes up less room in the garbage than the styrofoam boxes, so I'm not too on that. But moving to movies. Movie that came out this month that was not one of my favorites, but it's a good movie, was The Dark Half. Stephen King movie. Is based on the 1989 Stephen King novel. It's written and directed by horror mastermind. I talked about Alfred Hitchcock before. George A. Romero. Of course, the first zombie movie. Basically the first zombie movie. I know there's probably other ones with that, with zombies in it, but the first blockbuster that was made almost for nothing, The Night of the Living Dead from 1969. Recently watched that at a theater here They had a special screening of it. Great. I've never seen it like in the theater. It was great to see it there. But like I said, George A. Romero directed it. It's about a writer named Thad Beaumont who wrote under a pen name named George Stark. And he basically killed off George Stark because he wanted to write different type books and he wanted to do it under his real name. But somehow he had... See, what had happened is he was born like supposed to be twins, but like the twin was like born inside of his brain or something, and he had gotten seizures, and basically it came to life later on, but not like making him do things. It would like literally became another person, became George Stark, and started killing people and came after him because he killed off the character and he didn't want to be killed off. So crazy book, crazy movie. Definitely go out of your way to watch that and read the book. Of course, obviously the book's always better. That's a rule, it seems. But sports, we're gonna move into sports. Like I said, sorry I forgot to add the NASCAR stuff. But April was when baseball started, so at this time it was when the leagues were still in two divisions. Obviously the National League and the American League, but they're still the Western and the Eastern. The Reds were in the Western, because you know, Ohio out west. Why we weren't in the Eastern, I don't know. Probably had something to do with just the amount of teams, and that's where they had to stick us. But anyway, the leaders of the Western and the Eastern divisions were the Phillies, Astros, and the Giants. They led the NL, and the Angels, the California at the time Angels, now they're Los Angeles. They would in the middle of that they were the Anaheim Angels and the California Angels of Anaheim. Say that a million times fast. But anyway, the Angels and the Tigers led the AL. At this time, the Reds were 9-14. We were 6 games back. We had finished 31 games back, but just 8 games under 500. Think about that now. We're 31 games back because of just having the two divisions. When in real time now, 2025, we are 5 games above 500, and we are 6.5 games back, I think, or 7.5 games back in the Central. But we're 5 games above 500. We're 8 games under at this time, and we're 31 back. Like, I'm glad they redid the divisions into 3 divisions per, and they added more playoff teams. Because at this time, if you don't remember how baseball was then, the leader of the West faced the leader of the East, and then that winner went to the World Series for each league. You know, nowadays some people say they add too many playoff teams. I don't know. I like it because I like all the competition, and it makes it exciting. But at this time, if you don't finish first in the whole division, you're out. Like I said, we were only 8 games under 500. Not a bad record at all, but 31 games back. Of course, that year, the Blue Jays would end up beating the Phillies to win the World Series. And this was the year the National League expanded from 12 to 14 teams, which would even both leagues for the first time since 1976. The teams that were added were the Colorado Rockies and the Florida Marlins. Of course, they're the Miami Marlins now. The Marlins would, 4 years later, win the World Series. The Rockies still haven't even been to the World Series. The way that team goes, I don't know if they'll ever get there. But players of the month were Barry Bonds and John Olerud, if I can talk. And the pitchers of the month were Ken Hill and Jimmy Key. I'm going to quickly talk about video games, and I'm going to get into wrestling last. The best video games of the month, best selling games, I should say, for NES, because this is the time the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis were out, but still they were selling NES games. The number 1 game was Tecmo NBA Basketball, which I've discovered by doing this a lot, because most of the years I've been doing this, whenever the Nintendo was still involved, it was either right at the end of Nintendo's life cycle or during Super Nintendo being out. But most of the games I've noticed have been Tecmo sports games have been number 1, because they would still make those games while the Mario games were being made for Super Nintendo. Obviously, they weren't still making Mario games for NES. They were mostly making just sports games for the ones that still had Nintendo. Super Nintendo's number 1 game of the month was Star Fox. Sega Genesis was Street Fighter 2 Classic. Game Boy was Super Mario Land 2. And the Sega Game Gear, which was their version of Game Boy, was Streets of Rage. Love that game too. We're going to talk about wrestling now. Some news in wrestling. The first episode of ECW Hardcore TV aired on April 6th on Sports Channel Philadelphia, and I've watched the first like 6 months of episodes. I downloaded them from, I won't say on here because I'll get banned, but I downloaded them at some point, and it was so weird. It was still, under the time, it was still owned by Todd Gordon, and the booker, you know, the guy who made the matches and all the stories and stuff, was Eddie Gilbert. Paul Heyman wasn't even in the company yet. He would join the company shortly after this and be like help with promos and producing and stuff. But in September, when Eddie Gilbert left, I guess he had a falling out with Todd Gordon. Paul Heyman would take over that, and the rest is history. 2 years later, in 1995, he ended up buying the company out from Gordon, and But a lot of people think, oh, Paul Heyman, ECW, yeah, but he wasn't even there when the company started, so he definitely didn't start the company. But obviously, during the early run of ECW, they had a lot of title changes. On April 3rd, and aired on the first Hardcore TV, Don Morocco defeated ECW heavyweight champion Jimmy Snuka for the title. That shows how different it was. Everything's ECW, Tommy Dreamer, Sandman, Sabu, Taz, RVD, I can go on and on, New Jack, the Dudleys. No, Don Morocco and Jimmy Snuka were fighting for a title in 1993. You can tell that this company wasn't the same ECW it would be. That's just that it really took Paul Heyman to bring his vision to that. But anyway, April 2nd, Tony Stetson and Larry Winters defeated ECW Tag Team Champions, the Super Destroyers, which was Adre Petrucci and Doug Stahl. Never heard of them. And the next day, the Suicide Blondes, which was a three-man team, so I guess they got to do it Freebird rules. If you don't know wrestling, Freebirds... I can't talk today. The Fabulous Freebirds were a team consisting of 3 people. But, obviously they'd tag team. It would be 2 people in tag teams. But they came out with the Freebird rule, which meant that team could defend the titles, not just the 2 that won it. But they must have used it here. The Suicide Blondes were Chris Candido, Johnny Hotbody, and Chris Michaels. And they won the titles. But the big show this month, they didn't have WCW didn't have a pay-per-view or a Clash of the Champions. But the big show of the month was WWF WrestleMania 9. Which, by the way, there's a great documentary that came out on Peacock back in April, might have been March, but it was getting ready for WrestleMania, which was this year's WrestleMania 2025 was in Las Vegas. Next year's is going to be too. But there was a documentary because they had all this footage that they filmed, so they used all this footage plus new interviews and stuff of just how they put WrestleMania 9 together. It was from Caesar's Palace, but it actually just was in a vacant parking lot that they set up an arena, and they ended up selling like 16,000 tickets. But yeah, it was just outside in a parking lot. The very first WWF appearance of Jim Ross, who had recently left WCW. Obviously, he was play-by-play there and worked backstage like a producer type role. But very first appearance for him, he was taking over for Gorilla Monsoon, who had gotten sick by then. So it was his first day, and it was the world's largest toga party where they're all wearing togas. They all look completely ridiculous. Except Macho Man, I think he was wearing his normal outfit. He's like, screw this. But The Undertaker defeated Giant Gonzalez by disqualification in a match the Undertaker still hates to this day. That was number 3 in his legendary WrestleMania undefeated streak. Of course, nobody even thought about the streak at that time. But the main event saw Yokozuna defeating Bret Hart for the WWF title. But that's not where the night ends. That was the night that he cheated to win. So Hogan came out protesting, and Bret Hart told him to get in there and he got in there to beat up Yokozuna because they were beating up him, and Mr. Fuji were beating up Bret Hart after the match. And for some reason, I'll get into this in a minute, but Mr. Fuji challenged Hogan right away to a match, and even said Yokozuna would put the title on the line. And Hogan was outside thinking about it. Bret Hart's like, go do it, go do it. And like 2 minutes later, Hulk Hogan ends the night as WWF champion when he was only on the show in a tag team title match that they ended up winning. I can't remember if they even won or lost by disqualification. It was him and Brutus Beefcake against the $1 Million Man and IRS. But anyway, that's, if you watch the documentary, you'll see that Hogan politicked his way to get the title. You know, he was supposed to lose it back to Bret Hart, but he never did. He lost it back to Yokozuna, and some like a Japanese photographer set off a flash in his face and like blinded him, and Yokozuna won. Anyway, it was a crazy night. It was the first time ever the WWF title changed hands twice in one night. But like I said, that leads me to talking about, the last thing I want to talk about was Hulk Hogan, because everybody's had their videos about him. I didn't want to make one specifically. Just going to get right out of the way. Everybody knows all of the racist stuff that he said, and it's obviously not right. And I've said this about everybody. Dying doesn't take away what you did in your life. But at the same time, none of us should ever judge anybody as far as, you know, I mean, we can judge them to a certain point, but not like judging how they personally are. You know what I mean? Like you can choose to not associate with people based on what they do, and that's fine. But like, I have no right to sit here and say, well, he shouldn't have done this and this is wrong. You know, when I do all kinds of things wrong, and so do you, and so do everybody else. I'm not trying to get too religious on here, but you know, none of us are able to judge anybody. And I see so much hate. Like, there's this idiot on my, what was her name, Ronnie Nicole or some wrestler that wrestled for Supreme like 9 years ago, but she obviously, you know, and has the right to be offended by what Hogan said. That's fine. Anybody that's offended by it, I'm not saying you shouldn't be, or you know, because when he apologized, his apology basically consisted of he was just telling people, making a joke out of it, telling people, be careful what you say because there's cameras, not I'm sorry for what I said. But anyway, this person's like, oh, if you're on my friends list and posting the Hogan tribute stuff, I hate you. Basically said that, so I deleted her. Because she says you're going to unfriend anybody that did it. I just didn't give her the chance. And the past year, I have been very vocal about Hogan as far as, you know, when he got booed on Raw. You know, of course, everybody takes the Trump stuff because he supported Trump. So, oh, they hate Hogan because he's a Trump supporter. And there's people that did hate him for that. My problem with Hogan was two things. Obviously, the racist stuff and not really taking accountability for it. But just the amount of lies he did. Like, it's comical, all his lies. Like, they're legendary. Like, he wrestled 400 times in 1 year because if you count him crossing the international date line, or claiming to wrestle for this sick kid that stunk and died, and but by the time he got back from his match in Wembley Stadium, which he'd never wrestled in Wembley Stadium. And of course, his most famous one, I think, is he was going to play bass for Metallica. And of course, I've taken Hogan to task for all his creative control, like ruining the Starrcade 1997 match that should have been a slam dunk. They've been building it for a year and a half with Sting. Sting should have went out as the champion. You know, the hero wins the day. The NWO is defeated. And he, you know, according to him and Bischoff, Sting wasn't tan enough, so they didn't think he was putting any effort into it. He's hanging out in the rafters all year, you know, basically a recluse. He's, you know, almost like goth now. What do you think, he's going to be hanging out at the gym with a tan on the beach like he was before the Surfers thing? It went with the character. Anyway, his famous "that don't work for me, brother" line when he didn't want to do something. Now, that's my problems I had with Hogan. And I laughed when he got booed the last time he was on WWF TV, or WWE TV. Now I wish I hadn't, because that was the last time he was on there. Like I said, the stuff he did, I'm not saying, oh, it's gone. You know, it was some horrible stuff he said, like the, you know, and I'm not going to get into any more of it because I'm not trying to make this a Blast Hulk Hogan thing. It's actually trying to make it somewhat of a tribute. But he was a flawed human being, just like we all are. I think the problem that a lot of us had with him, I guess, is we all knew the say your prayers and take your vitamins was all, a character. Obviously it was proven that he did steroids, as did many of them. My favorite of all time, Ric Flair's admitted to doing. I'm not saying, trying to single him out on anything. It's just I'm talking about him, so obviously I'm going to talk about everything he did. But, what was my point? Just the fact that, not trying to beat a dead horse, and I don't mean that trying to be funny. It's just the first phrase to come into my head. But, there's people out there, almost treating him almost like Chris Benoit, like he killed his family, and he didn't kill anybody. He said some things that were wrong. He told a bunch of lies and stories and held people's careers down and stuff. But at the end of the day, like I said, none of us can really judge anybody. It's not our job at all. We can choose to not associate or other stuff, but, at the end of the day, what does it matter what I say about him? I didn't know him personally, and the ones that did know him personally, they claim to know a different side of him, and who am I to say they're wrong? I feel so bad for, his family was that stupid Hogan Knows Best reality show really, I think, split that family apart. I mean, there was obviously issues there, but I think if they hadn't had that and everything, I think they might have been able to fix things. But it's just, he's had so much drama involved in his life the past 20-something years that it's really sad that the way that ended. And it's just, like I said, he didn't kill anybody. He made mistakes. He's a human being, Not saying the mistakes are erased, but is it really affecting people that bad that they get offended because someone's upset that their childhood hero died? And that was really my point I'm trying to make is, a lot of people, he was the childhood hero. Like, my first experience with Hogan was I knew, most of the wrestling I watched was like what my grandpa would watch or my uncle would watch over at my grandpa, Papa Jesse's house, would be like the AWA. It was on ESPN. This was before I was watching wrestling, really. It was just when it was on. But I'd seen Hogan a few times, and, everybody knows Hogan, basically. Of course, you knew Sergeant Slaughter, too, because if you're watching G.I. Joe. But that's the only characters I knew from the WWF. In fact, the first when I started watching wrestling, like full-time watching it, I was watching WCW. And that was before Hogan got there. It was a year or two before he actually got there. So the only thing I knew of Hogan is I knew he did a leg drop, but in my mind, like, I thought a leg drop just seemed, even as a little kid that just started watching wrestling, it seemed like such a basic move that I was like, I thought for sure the leg drop he did was like off the top rope or something. I didn't realize it was just that lame leg drop. But that worked for so many years. He was a hero to so many, and you hear about all the fallen heroes, and like I said, not trying to get back into all that, but it still don't change the way you feel about a character. It's sort of like, you watch a movie with a character and you find out the actor did some bad things later on, yet it may taint the way you look at the movie from now on, but you still, if you love that character, you still can't just turn that off. Especially the people that knew him, like, no matter what he did, he was still their friend. You can't just stop being friends with somebody because they do this or they do that, or you can't stop being family with them. And like I said, that was my first experience, and of course I first saw him wrestle when he came to WCW, the red and yellow. But my very favorite time period was NWO. In fact, Friday when I went to wrestling, we did the 10-bell salute there. I wore my NWO shirt, my NWO hat. I should have wore it for this episode. But that whole time period, that was my time. Like, NWO was the coolest thing freaking going. Before DX even thought about being cool, it was the NWO. Hollywood Hogan, just that complete change. It was so, like, you had to be you know, you can talk about this, and kids that watch wrestling today can hear about it. It's like, oh yeah, NWO was an important time, but unless you experience these things firsthand, not even just watching the videos, but going through it and knowing what it was like to go to school and everybody be talking, did you see what the NWO did last night? Or did you see Sting came out of the... believe that? Whose side is he on? Like, this was a time, man. This was a time. You know, we always get the Attitude Era stuff with Stone Cold as being like the boom of wrestling, but it really started here in 1996 when the WWF was still at like a creative low. They were still, you know, they had the building tools there. They had Austin, you know, with that famous Austin 316 promo, and The Rock was just starting to find himself, and you know, Triple H as a different character of Triple H, obviously the blue blood Hunter Hearst Helmsley. But, you know, they had the tools there and was starting to build. But, you know, nothing beats that moment at Bash at the Beach when Hogan came out and joined the NWO, and fans were throwing garbage. Just, you know, there's so many memories of Hogan. Of course, speaking of The Rock, that match with him and, you know, Hogan and The Rock at WrestleMania 18 in the Sky Dome in Toronto, that was iconic. And then his street fight with Vince. And then Mr. America is just, you know, like I said, he can be a flawed person, and I'm not saying some of the things he did were right, but at the end of the day, you know, his life is over. You know, people that continue to beat down on him, what are you getting out of it, you know? Like I said, not whitewashing what he did, but let the man rest in peace. And not even really him. It's not like he's gonna, you know, hear this and make him upset. You know, he claimed that he was a born again Christian, and from the interviews I've seen, it wasn't a promote Hogan type thing. He really seemed genuine at it, with, you know, nothing to gain off of it. So I don't doubt that he was. So I believe he's in heaven, and you know, if, like I said, not trying to get too religious on here, but if you're a Christian, you believe that, you know, that you're forgiven for your sins, and you know, if Jesus can forgive, then that should be good enough for all of us. Like I said, you don't have to. I'm not saying that excuses murder or, you know, horrible things you say about people or the consequences from those. But at the end of the day, you know, his family's got to see all these comments on there and have lived, you know, life in the public eye, especially his daughter, who I think his son was close with him, but I think his daughter had nothing to do with him, with Hogan, or her mom, just because of all the, you know, trauma of stuff that she obviously dealt with since childhood and everything. But I hope near the end, because apparently he knew that his heart was weak for like the past month. But I hope they were able to have some kind of closure, and he was able to get closure with, you know, people that had, you know, been wronged by him, or maybe had wronged him. It's just, you know, it's very sad. It hit me at different levels, you know, like it's someone iconic like that for playing a character for so long. You know, I don't think I've ever said Terry Bollea. I don't think I've ever said that name before, ever. It's always been Hogan, which is his character name. But, you know, wrestling's a little different than acting. You know, I call The Rock The Rock. I don't call him Dwayne Johnson, even though that's his name. But anyway, you know, you get the character, you get the person. Where does one stop and one end, or start and end? It's, you know, it's just, you know, it's hard to deal with when something like that happens. Someone so iconic. And he wasn't just iconic in wrestling. Like, the whole world knew who Hulk Hogan was. You know, he was a movie star. You know, you can say what you want about it. Everybody makes the jokes about his movies and everything. And he made music. Not with Metallica, but he made music. He was on reality TV. He was in commercials. He had products. He had his own store at the Mall of America. He had his own cartoon in a time when cartoons were the biggest form of entertainment for kids ever. The thousands and thousands of toys and the wrestling buddies, the stuffed animals that made noise. And hold on a second here. Lunchbox that I picked up a long time ago. I mean, just it's hard. It's almost like losing a family member, even because you have family members you have problems with and you don't like the way they act, but at the end of the day, they still feel like family to you, and that's kind of how I feel about Hogan. I've said some horrible things about him in the past, and I'm not proud of the things that I've said because they were judgmental. And, that's something I'm working on. But anyway, this has been therapy with me. But anyway, I couldn't do this podcast without talking about him. Sorry if I made it run a little long, but, share some of your favorite Hulk Hogan memories in the comments, and like I said, I'm not glossing over things that he's said or done. But at the same time, who am I to beat someone over it, He had to deal with the stuff that he did personally, I don't have to deal with the consequences of things he said. He had to. So, at the end of the day, don't go after somebody because they're mourning losing somebody that, even if they personally said something to offend you, it's, I don't know where I'm going. This is just, I hate seeing all the negativity, and people that have him almost built up like he's some kind of murderer or something, He was at the end of the day, he was a flawed human being, but like I said, so are we all. And thanks for joining me for this podcast. Like I said, rest in peace to Hulk Hogan, the man Terry Bollea, and the character Hulk Hogan. That character really is, like he said, will be immortal because nobody will ever stop talking about Hulk Hogan when it comes to wrestling. And I didn't even address the fact that he definitely wasn't one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, as far as like wrestling ability, but as far as like the way he made people feel, his interviews, the way he did stuff in the ring, it created a generation of wrestling fans. I guarantee it. There's not. It wasn't just because he was good at backstage politics that he was the number one guy for years. And you say the name Hogan, you don't even have to say Hulk. You say Hogan, and instantly you're gonna think of him. Not many people have that name power, and I'm not even talking about wrestling fans, just general. You walk outside, you say, you know who Hogan is? They'll say, oh yeah, Hulk Hogan, he's that wrestler guy. Not many people get that level of notoriety, and Hulk Hogan was definitely one of a kind. But I'm going to leave it with that. Next week, if you decide to join me, next week won't be as long, I promise, or as rambling. But next week, we're going to be on episode 41. We're going back to where we were last week. Last week, I was in March of 1998. This week, we're going to September of 1998. And this is my 6th trip through 98. I was 14 at the time, and being September, 8th grade, it just started. So, getting ready for my final year of middle school. A lot of changes happened that year. I might touch on some of those, even though it wasn't happening at this time. But a lot of changes were happening in that year, towards the middle to end of it. Or not middle of it, just the end of it. But like I said, we'll get into some of that next week. Rest in peace, Hulk Hogan, and thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you next time.
Tales from the 90's never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling war.